Hey there, I'm Jan Ozer, and today I'm speaking with Alex Davies, Senior Analyst at Rethink Technology Research. We're going to be talking about their new report, the Media and Entertainment Transcoding Workload and Device Royalty Forecast for 2020 to 2030. We'll dive into how AV1, VVC, and LCEVC all factor into the new landscape and what it means for publishers. Thanks for joining me, Alex.
Cheers, Jan.
So, the whole karma about writing a report for 2020 to 2030 is that at some point, you're in that forecast period and the numbers have to align with reality. So back in 2021, you were pretty bullish on VVC, and now that's changed. So what's happened?
Yeah, it's been very disappointing, I think, for the industry. When we initially created this project, the methodology was look at HEVC, look at AVC, track the historical patterns and then predict forward from that. And of course, every model is useful. No, other way around. Every model is wrong, but some of them are useful. And I hope this one is a useful one. But the sort of high level part on what's changed really is that VVC is just not following the traditional sort of pattern. And with HEVC and with AVC pre-standard finalization, there were hardware decoder designs available. It's now the end of November in 2025, where we're 5 years past VVC being sort of finished. You're 6 years past when it was essentially finalized, and I think it's very telling that Qualcomm still hasn't put it into silicon. And yeah, there's my kind of view is there's no real pull from the market for it, which means that the likes of Qualcomm, who are the ones that have to, bear the additional cost for the royalties, they don't want to put it in products if they don't have to. And so it's a kind of catch-22 where, chicken or egg, classic kind of scenario. But the other piece is in that sort of time frame since 2015-ish, we've seen the average sort of fixed line and mobile broadband bandwidth rocket upwards, well past the minimum requirements for streaming. And we know that these streaming services like to put as small a stream out to the user as possible. And simultaneously, and this is more the sort of the longer view, is that the on-device processing power for essentially enabling software decode, if you track that, the available horsepower is kind of shooting upwards. And so if you really, really, really needed to do VVC, you can probably do it in software on flagship devices now, and probably last year's flagships too, because that was Qualcomm's IBC pitch. It was, hey, look at these cool software decodes that we're doing with Tencent. So I'll pause there, I reckon. But a lot has changed.
So, good chance to step back and look at the report itself. I mean, how do you gather data for a report like this? And once it's published, who do you think the report is primarily designed for? Yeah,
so the sort of underlying data set is video devices. And based on the kind of platform there of how many devices are sold each year, how many devices are in use, you can begin to model an estimate of usage, because you can kind of say, well, there's this much, hours of content being watched on this kind of device, and work your way up from there. And then, I spend a lot of time interviewing people, chatting to people at shows. I'm just back from Demuxed, which was pretty interesting because it's just all engineers. There's some useful kind of public data out there as well. The bit move-in reports are pretty handy, but again, that's just kind of showing you what people are being asked to do professionally, so that you can kind of, I think you can move both ways from those sorts of things. But generally, it's lots of off-the-record discussions. This time round was the first where all of the patent pools had a chat with us. Partly helped because VLOS isn't a pool anymore in some ways. And in terms of who buys it. I mean, like Rethink TV is a subscription service, and you can head to our website, rethinkresearch.biz, and if you go into video and then find testimonials, there's some customers up there. But yeah, lots of licensors, lots of streaming services, a good chunk of OEMs, ODMs too. But this isn't so relevant for like our kind of usual pay TV ISP subscriber base, I guess.
Okay. Well, what do you see as the key findings for software publishers? You know, if I'm a streaming publisher, you know, everybody from Netflix and Prime all the way down to much smaller publishers.
I think if you're a publisher, like a video service, you should be aware that there's these new streaming focus pools, which are going to start knocking on the door and asking you to pay them. That would be the big thing. So you have Access Advance Video Distribution Pool, VDP. There's also a VVC Video. Both of those have like considerable overlaps in members, and they are both they're monetizing the same patents in many cases. There's a mechanism that is going to prevent you paying twice. Access has been burnt on that before, so it's quite sensitive to it. But then separate to those, there's also the LCEVC VDLP, which is a kind of... I mean, LCEVC is quite cool, but they're still quite early days. And that is a kind of an enhancement layer, I guess, right? It's not a full codec, but it's a way to kind of add additional compression and do it all in software. And then the other LCEVC piece is that they have also just decided to target devices, so TVs and set-tops. So that's new. That's kind of novel. So those are worth looking at. You can kind of piece together the sort of anticipated prices for access. Like if you do it yourself, you can ask me and I'll do it for you, of course. But the weird part on access is if you are a AVOD or a fast service, there's 3 different components which determine the pricing, and it's worth going and looking at those and sort of finding out which tier of fee you're going to fall in. But the short answer is it makes a lot of sense in SVOD, but the way that the tiers work in AVOD and fast are a bit strange. And also Avanci hasn't published its pricing yet. So that's my chance to update this soon. Is Avanci have said we're very close to announcing the first licensees, and when we do that, we'll have the pricing. And when they do that, I'll be able to go back and just update.
I guess, you know, you're saying VVC isn't coming. Does that mean AV1 is coming?
Yeah. I mean, AV1 availability on devices it's improved a lot. AV1 software decode is actually pretty feasible for a lot of things, but essentially, if you're an iPhone, I think since the 15 was when AV1 made it into hardware in there, and then if you're an Android device after 2020, I think that cutoff is. That was when it was initially proposed, but it's probably more like 22. You should have an AV1 decoder to make use of, and I don't know if it's worth, you know, redoing your entire workflow to leverage it. But the sort of alternative, I guess, is if you're sticking with AVC and you don't want to go to HEVC, then AV1 might be more of an option now than it was a couple of years ago. But again, if you're in HEVC now, like I'm not sure if there's a huge argument to move to AV1. It just will sort of depend on the sorts of devices you're trying to deliver video to.
What's your sense of HEVC usage? I mean, I know it's big for premium content producers that are distributing video to television sets, but what about mobile? Is it becoming the codec of choice for mobile, or is AVC still there?
In mobile now, my view is there's a surprising amount of AV1 and VP9 happening, and that's essentially because of like the sort of Google, Android, AO Media interplay, also with Meta being an advocate for it. Anecdotally, like trying to make any of my devices deliver an AVC stream to me these days is kind of difficult. If it's a large screen one, it tends to go to HEVC, and if it's mobile or web, it always seems to be AV1. I know, very anecdotal, and I don't do all the sort of benchmarking you do, Jan. But the availability of AV1 is surprising, I think. And sure, it's an uncomfortable sort of royalty scenario with Sysvel, and there's that hostility between Sysvel and AU Media is still there. But we haven't had that big legal showdown that I've been really hoping for
since 2022. I recall.
Yeah. Yep.
So I guess the big knock, at least from my perspective, is AV1 usage. I mean, you say it's a tremendous number of streams, and it really is, but that's still seemingly just Meta, YouTube, and Netflix. I mean, what is your sense of any other publishers who are using AV1 at this point in any kind of major way?
Outside of that group, I don't think it's much. Like, not. There's a lot of viewing and sort of device type consideration you can make, and if you are a video streaming service that has budget, you're almost certainly using HEVC now, and the devices you want to deliver to, whether they are smart TVs, dumb TVs with some sort of connected TV device, an operator set-top box, if it's a big screen, it's probably got HEVC and you're already set up to do it, so you'll stick with it. The sort of mobile side of it, where more and more viewing time is moving to mobile, and similarly it's app-based, not browser-based consumption in mobile, means that there's an awful lot of interest. TikTok is difficult it's not so easy to kind of carve out and say, I reckon this much of TikTok is this codec, as it is with Instagram or the YouTube app. But I mean, maybe that this is a tangent, but it's quite interesting to see how the kind of Chinese state has made it a kind of national strategic endeavor to become more important, more central to like video and cellular patents, and so the VVC Chinese foothold is tinfoil hat time. Maybe one of the reasons why AV1 is more important these days. But
tinfoil hat. I'm not sure I follow, but it does raise an interesting point. It seems like VVC, a lot of the major patent owners are Chinese, and the myth of software decoding on VVC is takes place almost exclusively in China, it seems. So what do you know about companies using VVC with software decode in China?
There's been some pretty compelling sort of demos, but I don't think it really extends much beyond that. This ties back to what I was saying about the bandwidth, where if you need to deliver millions of streams, then sure, being able to get a double-digit reduction in size is good, but the sort of bigger question, the more existential question is, if you're actually trying to deliver short-form video, where it's the immediacy of playback that's your main concern, rather than the like size of the stream needed, then there's a different set of priorities that are sort of to play, and really moving from HEVC to VVC doesn't really do much for you in terms of playback starting. It's more the kind of the packaging side, and to be honest, that's a little bit beyond my skill set there. But that's a longer term question as well. It's how quickly can you get something going.
So I guess to just kind of nail this, then we can move on. I had always taken the fact that there were Chinese companies using VVC with software decode as a reality. Are you saying that may not be a reality, or you don't know at this point?
Just that in relative terms, it's fractional. It's a small amount of mobile devices. It's not in. It's still a fractional rounding error in large screen, and sure, like Huawei is probably going to be the first flagship smartphone with VVC, but again, like it's going to be sold predominantly in China, and if it's not sold in China, it's going into markets that generally have lower ARPUs, and so I don't see much lift for it in that regard. It might be different once Qualcomm adds it, but I've been saying once Qualcomm adds it for I think 4 years now, and Qualcomm still hasn't done it. And yeah, that's the line,
So
I think.
the other myth that I've kind of focused in on for a while is the myth of software decoding, at least as it relates to publishers other than the big three. And we all recall what happened, I guess, in 2024 when YouTube switched to software decoding for AV1, and the Reddit blew up, and I don't know how much of that was mountain versus molehill, but are there any mainstream publishers you're aware of looking at software decode for either AV1 or VVC in any jurisdiction, or are they basically saying, look, we want hardware because it preserves battery life and ensures quality of experience?
I think it's the latter, definitely. There's a need to be flexible and to show that you can move if you need to, especially if you want to start trying to throw your weight around in license contract negotiations. But the sort of if the hardware decoder is available, you are essentially a fool if you don't make use of it, and so retooling a workflow to use a more inefficient software decoder, just it doesn't really make commercial sense. Very different conversation if you're a very small niche service, where you might not be able to take such like a grandstand, but for the big services, hardware is the way to go. And if it's a phone, you can kind of hope to have a bit more flexibility through the app, but if it's a browser, those are a bit slower moving. And then if it's something like a smart TV, you can't deploy software to it. Do you kind of trust what's there? Do you trust a software implementation that got pushed out 3/4 past its target, or do you just stick with the devil which is the hardware one? So currently, no. There's sod all software decode. When I zoom out and try and look at it at like a global level, it's not there.
So I love the Bitmovin reports. They're I guess it was encoding.com had their report that was actual encoding data that stopped 4 or 5 years ago, and Bitmovin's the only report left standing. So it's great data. But their predictions for codec usage just seem incredibly optimistic. And every year, it's like Lucy in the football. It's like this year, 32% of publishers say they're going to use AV1, and next year you'll see the same number. So how do you reconcile what Bitmovin predicts and the actual market reality, if you can reconcile it?
This is one of the problems. You have to try and dig around and ascribe kind of a value or a trust to these things, but I think the more important thing in the Bitmovin, codecs used in production question is just the fact that AVC is continuing to fall, and as long as we know that AVC is falling, it kind of implies that other usage must be increasing. But what's interesting, and this is something I bounced off Bitmovin, but the kind of VVC usage declines through 23, 24, 25. And then so does EVC is basically nothing now, and LCEVC is flat. VP8 is falling, VP9 and AV1, however, they're increasing. And I think the best way to kind of join all of those up is just that you are, as a video service provider, you are now focusing more on the codecs you prefer. It's not now that you need to look at 6, it's more that you need to look at 4. And so you as an engineer, or whichever piece of it you're involved in, it's just a allocation of resources. And I mean, I think the Bitmovin stuff is pretty interesting. That kind of consolidation, you see it as well in the encoding type. So it seems that 2023 there was more of a blend of like on-prem and then private cloud and public cloud, but now it looks like the services are kind of focusing in on what they want to do. And so I think those two views make sense, that you are refocusing on fewer codecs and you are refocusing on fewer encoding approaches. That's I think what I would take away from the bit moving bit. But if you look at the raw number, like engineers being asked to use VVC now is something like 5%, which is pretty telling as well.
And I guess the other point about the bit movement report is it's not just publishers. So there's a lot of service providers and infrastructure providers that need to utilize all codecs, even if they're not deploying them, themselves as publishers. One of the things you predicted, I guess, back in 2022 would be that there would be some clarity on the, one of my pet peeves is it seems like a bunch of people are still putting royalty free in front of AV1. Where there are pools for both hardware decode and software at this point, content. So, when do we expect to see, and you're not in the boardroom of CISVEL, so you can't really say, but, what's your expectation about when we'll get clarity on whether AV1 is royalty free?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to get it. There's been a hope that you would have a clear, legal showdown. If you speak to those who are more in the AO media side of things, they are more confident now than I think they were for the past 3 years or so. They're more confident that anyone who brought AV1 patents against them, that those patents would, through the process, be found to be unenforceable. And if that is the case, and I believe it is the case, it kind of means that if you are a license, or if you're the likes of Nokia and you want to try and use patents to get money out of someone for AV1, you risk having those patents declared invalid. And so now we're kind of at a stalemate. And sure, CISVEL exists and it's going for VP9 and AV1 royalties, but the royalty-free bit from AO Media is also frustrating because that's not true. I don't think we're getting the giant indemnification sweep which we might have hoped for, because AO Media has very deep pockets and could do it if it wanted to. So it's a stalemate really, and I'm not sure there will be much of a change on that front. There's lots of irons in the fire, but I don't think anyone really wants to sort of bring them to bear because there's kind of too much risk.
Interesting. And I guess the same dynamic, the whole AV1 versus VVC versus HEVC decision as a content publisher, there's really no difference, nomenclature aside, because the Avanti pool and the Access Advanced pools all charge for all those royalties. So do you sense that there'll ever be clarity on the content side any more than, you just predicted that there wouldn't be on the device side. What about on content?
Yeah. Content is more difficult because those streaming service focus pools are charging for codecs and MPEG dash as well. I've had those described as very good patents. I've had other people say they are the dregs that couldn't make it into the main hardware decoder pools. And so this is the very first year of them trying to sign services up. It's worth, I think, pointing out that the relative cost of being compliant with those services is very low for the very big services. It's kind of regressive. If you're a small service, you pay loads more. Off the top of my head, I think it caps out at, I think it's 12 million it caps out for the tier 5 services, but a tier 1 would be paying something like 3, and the difference in subscribers or the difference in revenue is much bigger than 4 to 1. So it's, in some ways it's a rough deal if you're a small provider, just the way they've done the tiers. But I don't know if the amount that they're going to charge for those streaming services is going to be enough to warrant like an immense legal showdown. Like if you are being asked for single-digit million payments and you turn over, a couple of billion, yeah, I think it's probably a wise decision to pay it, even if you're affronted by it.
Okay. What's your, I know you're a broadcast report. What's your sense of when AI-based codecs will start to move into the broadcast realm?
Yeah, there's a few different tracks on that. It's still very much like in development. I think maybe the more directly relevant one is this project between Nokia, Ericsson, and Fraunhofer to do a 6G native codec. And I think reading between the lines, that means doing a bunch of the encoding, decoding, and transcoding within the radio access network itself. So maybe that's a way that they try and prop up their mobile infrastructure business. Away from that, the sort of on-device AI side of it, in terms of like using an AI model, there's some approaches that want to push a model to the device such that you can send different data rather than like frames. You can send what would essentially be inputs to the model, and then the model will use essentially a smaller bit stream to create the video on one end. Sounds interesting, but again, you're kind of you face the same problems with silicon inflexibility as you do with like hardware decoders. So you kind of require stability from the ecosystem when it comes to like shipping consistent neural processing units, as they're usually called, NPUs. So if they're changing every single year and you're trying to do a very complicated like model, that's quite a head scratcher. And similarly, like those sorts of things are just, they are never really going to arrive in like an operator set-top box or a smart TV, because that's just additional cost and they just do not want to do that. So there's
the nice thing about VVC is, it's a nice discrete function that can be very well defined and implemented in hardware, where NPU is generic and everybody's going to do it a little bit differently. There's so much, I've written about H.267, and you just referenced some contributions that may make it into H.267 with Fraunhofer and Nokia. It seems almost ridiculous at this point, because VVC, as you pointed out, was, finalized in 2020, has gone nowhere. What's your sense of MPEG going forward as a standard setting organization for video codecs? It seems like it's almost hilarious that, and I'll get to a question in a second. It's almost hilarious that, Qualcomm is one of the biggest VVC patent owners, but they haven't implemented in hardware. So, the whole context of a VVC standard just seems almost irrelevant, certainly to publishers, and doesn't look to be relevant anytime soon. Why should we even care about H.267?
As a video service provider, I don't think you should. The sort of MPEG, JVET, what's the other one?
MPAI.
MPI is a bit strange, but no. MCIF, that's the other one. There's lots of those standards groups, and if you spend enough time around them, you get on board, you see like the vision. But then speaking to various professionals in the industry, there's a lot of people who will love to chew your ear off and complain about how kind of inefficient that is. A sort of longer term view, and I floated this to most of them, and the sort of the streaming services themselves don't really have an appetite for creating their own codecs, but you can kind of see how the sort of streaming model approach that the current AI focus has would then mean that you would have a model that sat inside the application that you're streaming the video on, and then you as the video service would be sending data, a bit stream to that model, and you would use just that model. And that's probably easier to do, but again, it comes back to that sort of silicon availability. Yeah. And so if you if you have built a model for a specific MPU or whatever, bit of the chip that you're going to use, is that scalable? And I guess the worst people in Silicon Valley will tell you that you can just vibe code like all of that and solve that problem. But then I think if you speak to broadcast engineers, they would just turn white, as if they'd seen a ghost. If you said, "Oh yeah, we'll just vibe code this live workflow."
Well, that doesn't eliminate the need for a standardized decoder either.
Yeah.
What's your sense of what happened in Brazil with LCEVC and VVC, and what are the implications for that in other areas around the globe?
Brazil has always been a bit of an edge case. I got asked by the Colombian Ministry of Communication to go out and do a sort of panel chat there, which was quite cool. But that was when I was wearing my cellular hat. And so part of that was just me asking everyone there all of these little questions that I've had. And generally, the rest of that region just looks at Brazil and says, "Oh, you crack on, mate. I'll stick with DVB or ISDB, thank you very much." So I can't see that TV 3.0 success in Brazil leads to other countries choosing to do it. I think it's a good example because the US ATSC 3.0 debacle is still dragging on and could maybe learn some lessons from like the pace of Brazil, but the sort of VVC and LCEVC mandate in hardware is on the one hand good, but on the other hand you're just going to have to wait for all of the devices to get updated. And in Brazil I think that's a bit more feasible because they're like quite restrictive on what devices can come into the country. Like there's very high tariffs on things. That's not so true in the US or Europe, where you just kind of have to wait for these new decoders to kind of trickle out into the market. So yeah, it's good, but I don't think it changes the needle really because Brazil is kind of isolated.
Okay. Well, what's happening with this is pretty topical with Dell and HP regarding HEVC, which they're turning off on some of their notebooks. I don't really understand that. What do you take from that?
Yeah, this is on my list of things to dig into, but my understanding is that this is a kind of opening gambit in a big dispute because the terms are going to change. If you don't take a license before the 1st of January, you're essentially on the hook for like a 50% increase.
Who's when you say which patent pool is this that you're
that
describing?
Would be through the VIA LA, and then Access has some other terms as well. But 2026 is when essentially VVC monetization begins through the pools because that's when the introductory periods kind of finish. So disabling HEVC is strange because you've already got the decoder. So I don't think saying we've disabled playback can get you off the hook for it being there. And similarly, if it's a streaming service, so if it's Access VDP or if it's Avanci Video, it's not what the device has available, it's what's used. But because it's going to be multi-codec, I think the sort of angle there is you need to take a license because you're using one of these 4 codecs. And so if the device OEM begins disabling, if a service leans on them to do so, it doesn't change the sort of streaming pool's position. Windows and Microsoft is another kind of example of this because it'll direct you to the Windows Store to purchase the HEVC codec, and it's like 79 pence or 79 cents or whatever. It's really nothing, and you would hope that Microsoft could just eat that cost itself. But even a company as big as Microsoft doesn't want to, if it doesn't have to.
Okay, so I does that all translate to a big I don't know? I mean,
it's a very big I don't know. And if you look at the sort of the device caps, like the annual caps, and then if you try and rationalize those to revenue or like a per unit cost, like the numbers are incredibly small. It's just that that's not how these companies think of it. They are very departmentalized. That they have a budget, and if someone is asking them to increase any bit of their budget by 50, 60%, that leads to weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, and of course, like big fees for solicitors. So yeah, it's it's difficult.
What's the practical impact? I mean, if I'm an HP notebook owner and I go to Netflix and try and play video, do I just get AVC as opposed to HEVC?
Yep, that's the gist of it. Which Netflix isn't going to be super happy about because the higher bandwidth, but then the crushing of the ABR ladders that they're able to do these days, I don't know if it makes all that much difference to the Netflix Open Connect pricing, the interconnect pricing, because I'm always amazed when my EE set-top box will do 540p HEVC main 10 at 0.29 megabit per second, which is nuts. It doesn't look great, but it can be that low, and yeah, that's a long way off from where I think a lot of people think a stream should exist. But it's a long way of saying it will be AVC.
Okay, so coming back to the report, the report's available through Rethink, and how much does it cost? How do I purchase it?
Yeah, so rethinkresearch.biz is the website, and then inside there you can go to the video tab, and then there'll be a research and forecasting bit, and you can get in touch that way. I don't know pricing. I'm always kept away from this. But the gist is, if you're a small company, it's surprisingly affordable, and if you're a big company, we're a lot cheaper than the big consultancies. And Rethink TV itself is a subscription, so it's an annual subscription. So you'll get a whole bunch of other bits that are useful. So I'm currently finishing a fixed wireless access forecast, but the next thing will be CDNs and the apparent death of open caching. So that could be quite fun. Yeah. Okay,
listen, I really appreciate you sharing this data. I've always enjoyed the reports. It's great. There's so little hard data in codec usage these days, and it's great to have something out like that out there. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts today, and we'll catch up down the road.
Thanks very much, Jan.